Hi everyone. Today I'm going to do a fire dragon tumbler, and it's inspired by Lovely Lulu Designs and her Whirlpool Mermaid tumbler. So right here I'm just showing you the scales. They're made out of cardstock. They're about 1 inch high, but you can do whatever size you want. So I was working on this one, and my husband saw it and said you should do one that looks like a dragon. So challenge accepted. So here we go. So this is a 30-ounce skinny, and I'm using double-sided tape to attach my scales to the cup. And if you've seen her tutorial, I'm following her technique. So for my scales, for my spiral part, I was trying to kind of make a wavy kind of spiral, so it looked like the dragon was kind of gliding through the air, but in the end it ended up not working out the way I wanted it to, but the cup came out the way it was supposed to, so it wasn't a big deal. My little experiment failed, but the end result was just as it should be. So I think I laid down 5 or 6 pieces of tape to start with, and just like she had to do in her tutorial, you will end up having to add more tape as you go. You might have to add a whole nother row, or you only might have to add a couple of inches of tape. It just depends on where you are on the cup. And I don't remember what size tape this is. I believe it came in a 5-pack from Amazon, and I will leave the link for that in the description below. So once you get all your tape on there, then you want to start peeling off the backing paper, and then it'll be time to lay down our scales. You can make your scales whatever size you want. You can use the rounded bottom scales like I used on the other cup, or you can use the pointed scales. I did not have these in my files already, so I did purchase these off of Lovely Lulu's Etsy shop, and I will leave a link for those in the description as well. So I'm just gonna lay the first couple of rows for anybody who's not familiar with dragon scales, and then I'm gonna fast forward through the rest. I am leaving a little gap between my scale and the bottom of the cup, and I'm just trying to butt each scale up next to the one next to it. And I'm trying to make sure that I get them on there as straight as I can. And then you want to just make sure that you press them down, make sure they're stuck down on the tape. If not, epoxy will get underneath it. So I was able to fit 3 scales, and I wanted to add one more, so I'm going to add another piece of tape so I can get another scale on there. Now for the second row, you're going to lay your scale between the bottom two scales. And you either want to butt it up against them or overlap it. If you overlap it, you want to overlap it just very slightly. If you overlap it too much, it'll leave a gap, and then your epoxy can get underneath. So for these bottom rows, I did try to overlap it just very slightly, but as I worked my way further up the cup, I ended up just butting them up against the scales that were around it. Either way you do it, it's going to come out just fine. And I also did have some gaps between my scales too, because as you work your way up the cup widens a little bit. So you will get some gaps, but they're not noticeable once you get your mica powder and all that other stuff on it. It's not noticeable. It takes a little bit to hand place all these scales, but in the end the design is gorgeous and worth it. So as you can see, I have some gaps down at the bottom, and I have some up at the top too. And all I'm going to do for those is, as you can see, I have some extra scales down there. I'm just going to cut off what I need from those scales and place them on the cup. And it's okay if your cut lines aren't straight, because you're going to be covering it with glitter anyway, so you're not going to see it. So I got my bottom pieces added on. I don't show me doing the top, but I did the same for the top as well. And now it's time to move on to the next step. So don't do like I did. As you can see, my cup is spray painted, but my scales aren't. That is because I made a boo-boo. I spray painted my scales before I sealed them, and when they dried, it looked like a bunch of little butterflies had landed all over my cup. The cardstock curled under the spray paint. So make sure you seal your scales first. I used CC DIY Quick Coat to seal my scales. I did it twice. And then once they're sealed, then you can go spray paint. It happens. We get excited, we want to move on, and we skip a step, we get ahead of ourselves. It was no big deal. I was able to pull off those scales and add some new ones, and now we're back on track. So once that's all dry, now I'm going to use the tack it method. I'm using Aleene's Tack It Over and Over liquid, and I'm just going to apply it to my scales. And then once it turns clear, then it'll be ready to add our mica powders. I do a 50-50 mixture of water and the tacket liquid. And everyone has their own formula, but that's what's worked best for me. This chameleon mica powder is called Ragnar Rage, and it's from Geisha Glimmer. And I'm just going to use a makeup brush to apply it to the scales. The shift on this chameleon powder is absolutely gorgeous. I cannot get over how gorgeous this powder is. If you have never used it before, I highly recommend going and getting some, and I will leave a link for it in the description. When I first started, I was trying to go light, trying not to use too much powder, but I wasn't getting the effect that I wanted, so I started getting a little heavier with it, and it's gorgeous. Honestly, before this tutorial, I had never used chameleon mica powders. I've always used Pearl-X mica powders. My husband bought me all 3 sets, so that's what I've used. But I knew for this tumbler I wanted a different effect, and I'm so glad that I found this because it's absolutely gorgeous. I loved it so much I went back to her site and I bought all the chameleon powders that she has. Thank goodness she has Sizzle. So now I'm going to seal my mica powder with the CC DIY Quick Coat, and I think I only sealed it once. And then let it dry, and then it's time to move on to the glittery part. So I'm following Lovely Lulu's lead, and I'm using a ton of glitter on this. You can use whatever you want. I mean, you don't have to go by this. So that first glitter was Bumblebee. This one is Fuzzy Naval. This one is Autumn Blaze. Embers. Ring of Fire. That's going to be our first layer of glitter. This next one is Sundrops. Pumpkin Spice. Bonfire. Americana, and Vixen. This is our second layer. And all of these are Bumblebird glitters, and they are all available on the website. So now I'm just putting a very thin layer of epoxy, and I am putting a little bit over the edge of the scales there. But again, you can do it however you want. And I tried to follow the way that she did the glitters in her tutorial. And the first layer went down fine. The second layer started off the way I was trying to do it. And then by the end, they kind of just went their own way. But I was happy with the end result. So this first one, I'm laying down the center of the swirl. And I think in her tutorial, she started with her darker color first and then worked her way out to the lighter colors. But in this one, I was trying to follow how a flame would look, where it's light on the inside and then darker as it goes out. So after I lay my first color, then I'm going to lay the other colors on either side of it. So these are the chunkier glitters that are going on the bottom. And then the second layer is going to be the finer glitters to kind of fill in. And this one is Autumn Blaze. It's a chunky mix. Super pretty. So I started with yellow and then orange and then a red orange and now red. So now once you have your first layer of glitter on, then it's time to do our second layer. So as I said, I tried to do it the way she did it in her tutorial. She took her first color of her second layer and she tried to, or she did, put it between the first and second color. And that's how I started off, but it didn't stay like that. But I wasn't mad. I love this design. It's so pretty and there's so many different colors, color options that you can do. And that's the good thing about using epoxy for this cup, because epoxy takes a few hours to dry. So you have plenty of time to play with your glitters and you can kind of take your time and get it just the way you want it. So there we go. I got all my glitters on. So now I am going to let it dry and then it'll be time to move on. I forgot to do the top and the bottom, and I make another boo-boo. I laid my fine glitter first and then tried to lay chunky over that. That's not how it works. So I wiped it off, put a little bit more epoxy on, added my chunky glitter first, and then filled it in with my finer glitter. So that's 8 glitters on there, 10 glitters on there so far. So now what I'm going to do is, since I have Chunky on there, I need to help that Chunky to lay down flat. So I'm just wrapping it up in some parchment paper, and I'm going to use my hand to just smooth it out and help that Chunky glitter to lay down. And then just brush off any excess glitter that you have that may have gotten on your scales, and put it away for a few hours and let it dry. And now that it's dry, I'm going to be filling in some random scales with some glitter, and you don't have to do this part. In her tutorial, she used some chameleon mica flakes. I am going to be using some holographic glitter, and I'm just using a paintbrush and some Mod Podge, and I'm just picking just random scales. And this glitter is Copperhead. So you don't have to do this part. You can skip this part if you want. If I do another one of these, I kind of had second thoughts about doing it. So if I do another one of these fire dragon ones, I'll probably skip this part. But I wasn't hating it. I just didn't think that it really needed it. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to come back and seal our glitter. So I'm going to seal my random scales first. That way they don't contaminate my scales, the rest of my scales. And then I'm going to seal the rest of the glitter. I sealed the glitter twice. I only show one time on here, but I did do it twice. And now, this is another step that it's up to you if you want to do. You can leave your cup just as it is, or you can add a little bit more glitter to it. I'm going to add some more glitter, so I'm putting on 15 mLs of epoxy. It's just enough for some chunky glitter to stick to it. And I'm just using my fingers, and I'm just sprinkling some small chunky and jumbo chunky glitters on there. So this first one is Embers. I'm reusing Embers. This one is Ring of Fire again. And I just put epoxy on, I believe I just put epoxy on the scale part. I mean on the glitter part, not on the scales. This next one is Copperhead Chunky. Next up, I'll be using Autumn Blaze again. And some people might think all this glitter looks a little busy, but don't forget you're also going to be doing a Milky Way effect over the top of this. This next glitter is called Honeycomb. So when I laid my glitters down, my first 2 layers, I started light in the middle and worked my way out to the dark. On this 3rd layer of glitter, I'm starting with the darker in the middle and working my way out lighter. And now I'm just patting down the chunky. I can't roll it in the parchment paper like I did before. And I'm sorry, I need to correct myself. The whole cup was epoxied, not just the glitter part. And that's why you can't roll it in the parchment paper. What I'm showing here is that I did end up going back and adding a little bit more yellow down the center because I kind of lost my yellow with all the glitter that was added. Now this layer of epoxy is 25 mLs. Because you have such 3 layers of glitter on there and you have your scales, it's going to take thicker coats of epoxy. So that one was 25 mLs. And now I'm going to do my Milky Way effect. So that was Armor Art Black and Armor Art White, and I got those from CC DIY. This is Pearl X, Brilliant Gold, and Pearl X Super Copper. I have 20 mLs of epoxy split into 4 cups. So 5 mLs of epoxy for each color. And it takes very, very little mica powder. You do not need a lot. Just a little bit on the end of your popsicle stick there. I have another 15 mLs of epoxy. That I'm going to be putting on the cup just to get it wet. I want my Milky Way to stick, but I don't want it to move too much. So you don't want a heavy coat of epoxy on there. So this is just 15 mLs of epoxy. And then it's time to start adding our colors for our Milky Way. Just applying it with a popsicle stick. Nothing too heavy or too gloppy. So just keep adding your colors until you get them how you want them. Just be careful with your black, because black does have the tendency to take over if you put too much. And I added the black and white on this Fire Dragon tumbler because I thought it kind of would represent smoke from the fire. So just be very sparing with your black. But if you do end up adding too much, I do end up going over the white and the black with a gloved finger, just to kind of smear it and break it up a little bit so it's not so gloppy. But if you add too much, you can always wipe it off. That was my point. So now once you have it the way you want it, then you're gonna let it dry, and you're gonna do sand. This is the point where you would sand and do your cleanup and all that, and then one more layer of epoxy, and it's all done. So I hope y'all like this cup.